you. So David Dennis is the president and CEO of Eckert Connects, one of the nation's largest nonprofits providing workforce development, Job Corps, juvenile justice, and child welfare services. He's earned certifications both as a CEO, he's earned awards, he's a licensed professional counselor, marriage family therapist, but I really know him as David, the CEO with a heart. Big heart. So David, thank you for being here. And I have so many questions for you. I really want you to be able to share more about Gameness with the people that are watching today. So
look forward to it, Patty. Good to be with you. It's an honor.
Thanks. So you wrote this book, Gameness, Land on Your Feet, Not on Your Feelings. So what is that all about? What does that mean? And what is Gameness?
You know, this morning on my way to the gym, I was listening to a podcast by a guy, and he was telling a story about an interview that he did recently with a renowned neurosurgeon. He's done over 1,000 brain surgeries. This gentleman was also a neuroscientist, really studied the mind and emotions. And this guy that I was listening to, and I can't remember his name, I could pull up the recording, but it hit me because it's so on point with what Gameness is all about. It's a big part of why I wrote the book. A question that this interviewer asked this neuroscientist was, if you could tell people that are listening one skill that you think is the most important skill for every person to aspire to develop in their life, what would that be? And he said, that's easy. He said it would be emotional regulation. And it just hit me. And he went on to talk about the guy asked him why. And he said, well, he said, all of us, have all kinds of feelings and emotions. And many of them are there because of maybe wounds in our past, maybe current stressors or experiences we're having now, maybe anxiety over a lack of clarity at what the future holds. But we all have feelings. And he said, the most important thing is that feelings don't become our masters, but that we learn to master our feelings. We learn to regulate our emotions. Otherwise, our feelings begin to make decisions for us that we later regret. And so I thought that was a very powerful statement today that I heard today. And while I don't use the term emotional regulation, that very much is the point of this book. The word gameness has always been appealing to me. I've always liked it. It's an old book from the old word from the 1800s. And when I first heard about it, it's perhaps a bit, I grew up in a farming community in Oklahoma, and so I became familiar with the term game dog as a kid. And what a game dog is, back in the 1800s, there was no ADP security systems. People had property, they had children, they were out in the field working in the field. Everybody was working. So, you had a dog that became your alarm, became your protector of your animals, your pets, your children, your property from intruders or predators. And so it was important to have an animal that was game enough to not be fearful and run away from any predator, but at the same time be nurturing and affectionate and could bond well with children and be a good family dog. And so when people got ready to look for a game dog, it was really important, the breeding of the dog. And it had to be a dog that was fiercely loyal, that was fearless, and at the same time very, very affectionate, connect well with the family. And that's where I originally got in touch with what gameness was about. So I always liked that. And I looked up the word in the dictionary, and it was a great definition, and kind of a secondary definition that I saw gave 4 attributes for the word gameness. And the 4 attributes became the 4 sections of this book. And there's 3 chapters in each one, so that's the 12 chapters. And the 4 sections of the book are the 4 attributes of gameness: never quit mindset, resoluteness to a purpose, fighting spirit, and the will required to act beyond your feelings, which gets to this emotional regulation. Why I selected the word, though, I wrote the book, as I've shared with you before, Patty. My reason for writing the book was to kind of have a leave behind life manual for our 5 children. I never had a relationship with my biological father, lost him when I was young. always wished I had some words of wisdom or conversations I remembered, his voice. So this is that conversation I never got to have with my dad. I told my kids that I was going to do for them. And so I decided I was going to try to boil down the message of what was the most important thing I could say to my kids, for them to always remember, that I felt like would be the most important advice I could give them to live their life to their fullest potential. And so when I really assessed all the things I wanted to share, and I was thinking about this word gameness, because I wanted to come up with one word that would trigger for them that message, if I could hone it into one word. And it was that one word. And so I really wanted them to understand that having a never quit mindset, having resoluteness to purpose, having a fighting spirit, and having the will required that would be required for them to act beyond their feelings was the most important advice I could give them. And so it was perfect for me. I lost your audible.
Yeah, sorry, I muted myself. There was some.
Oh,
That's very powerful, very powerful. Never give up, resolution, be a fighter, and having the will required to act. I mean, that's very, very powerful advice. I hate to say this when I'm talking to you today. I'm kind of feeling like these are David's 4 commandments.
well, they're my 4 aspirations
You're
for myself. And they're 4, I think, probably really big lessons that I had to learn in my life, starting at a very young age.
Yeah, so when you wrote the book, let's talk a little bit about a couple of technical details, because our audience primarily is business leaders, CEOs, founders, chairmen, people who will be CEOs. And so a lot of people would like to write a book, but they don't, In fact, I've talked to a lot of people who say, I have a book in me, or I've been wanting to write a book for 10 years, etc. But you did it. And I've done some myself, so I know what it takes. A lot, right? So
Did
a little bit about that. When you started this, were you writing hand notes? Were you making recordings for your kids? And then when did it evolve from a message for your children to a message for the world?
It's you couldn't be more accurate. For those in your audience that have never tried to write a book, one of the toughest things I've ever done. It's one thing to write a speech for an event or a motivational talk on one topic, and I had a lot of those kind of messages for my kids, and I would enter them into my journal. I started writing poetry many years ago, and prose and kind of short proverbial kind of pithy statements, and I tucked them away. Those were the kind of things I was going to share with my kids. And I had a collection of those, but I thought, I want to leave more than that. So I started trying to put more of a message to those. And it is hard, because when you really start trying to put all that together in a message that has some connectivity and that flows together and paints a picture, that's challenging. So, but it made me really think through what I wanted to say better. You also get very critical of yourself. It's hard to get to a point where you feel like it says it well enough, and so you just kind of get stuck with it. And I don't know, there's a lot of I remember one day I left the house. You just get stuck every now and then. And have you ever read the book War of Art? The War of Art.
The Art of War?
No, this is the War of Art.
War of Art. No,
Yeah.
I used to have an art gallery. We used to call it the Art of Business, but no, I don't know the War of Art.
Well, it would be a great book, I think, for any of your listeners to check out. It's a really small book, but this guy Stephen Pressfield, he's really an expert on Spartan history, and that's how I discovered him. I love Spartan history, and I've read a lot of his books. But he wrote this book about how hard it is to write or to do any kind of art. But there's a lot to it in terms of really running a business. It really has a lot. There's a lot there about learning to have the will to act beyond your feelings. So it's and all those things that kind of stop you from finishing whatever it is you need to finish. It's just a powerful little book. But I was stuck in one of those times, and I left and found this real trendy little coffee shop in Dunedin, Florida, which is near where I live. And I thought, I'll go down, put my headphones on, listen to some smooth jazz music, get me a latte, get in the mood, and see if it helps. And before long, I was in the zone. I was cranking it out. And I don't know if it was the caffeine or the ambiance, but I did this for many days and I was really making all kinds of progress. And one day, this little 20-year-old barista, Grant is his name, said, "Do you mind if I ask you a question?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you're in here working every day so hard on this. And I just got to ask, what are you working on?" And I started to tell him, but I hesitated for a split second because in that split second, I didn't want to tell him I was writing a book for the fear that I might not finish the book. And that's how crazy this is. And I was really struggling because my kids were saying, "Dad, how's the book coming?" I'm like, "Oh, why did I tell them I'm going to do this? I don't know if I'll ever finish it." So to answer your question, it was really tough. And this guy at the coffee shop started to walk off and he turned around and said, "Well, I'm so glad I met you because I've never met anybody that said they were writing a book that actually ever finished it." Yeah, yeah. I called that the latte landmine. And I just kind of smiled. I said, "Oh, yeah, well, that's great. I'm glad we met." I couldn't even write another sentence. I was frozen fear. This, here I am writing a book on gameness, and this 20-year-old barista just dropped me to my knees with one phrase. Because all I could think of is, what if I don't finish it? I'll just be another, like, I probably won't finish it. It's terrible to admit that, but you do. And I was on the way home and I just thought, you know what? How embarrassing. I am writing this book on gameness, never quit mindset, resoluteness to a purpose, fighting spirit, will required to have your face. And I just got toasted by this one phrase from this kid. And I thought, you know what? I got home and I wrote on a sticky note on my desk. I said, "I will finish this book and I'll give the first copy to Grant." And I did. And so it's kind of part of this whole message, though. I had to regulate my emotions. I had to have the will to act beyond my feelings, and I had to kind of deconstruct what caused all that to come up in me. And so it was really applicable, and it was actually one of the impetus for me to actually get more committed to my writing to finish the book.
From the time that you said, "Let me do this for my kids," to the time that you published the book, how long did that take?
The whole project, probably 2 years.
All right, well, that's actually pretty good for most authors. I had one client of mine who did a book, and he was telling me at some networking event that he had his book and he was working on his book, and I said, "When is it being published?" And he was kind of like, I don't know. And
Well, this was.
I wrote the foreword, and then I was there when he had his book launch and stuff. But congratulations, because you did that before AI came out. If you would have had AI, it might have helped. But you have all very original thinking that actually is wisdom passed down through the years.
That's really what I wanted, Patty. I mean, I really wanted it to be as me as it could be. I'm not a journalist or a trained writer, and I didn't want the writing to really feel that way. I wanted it to be pretty earthy, and that's why I kind of tell the message by using a lot of stories, versus tons of research. I really wanted it to be something the common person or the executive could read and remember, associate with those stories, and I wanted it to be stories from my life. Not just something I'd read or some factual research that I dug up or something like that. I really wanted it to be kind of really personal, and I wanted people who read it to feel like they could kind of know me too.
Yes. One of the things that you talked about in your first quadrant of the book is harvest what you have. And I know you came from very humble, challenging childhood, David, but just do the very short elevator speech version of what the hand that you were dealt, and then how you harvested what you had.
Yeah. By age 5, lost everything that was supposed to be permanent in a kid's life. Dad passed away. Mom, that was her second husband to lose in pretty tragic ways. She came from a tragic background, deep poverty, abandoned by her own father, no education. I had already lost 2 kids to the welfare system. She succumbed to alcoholism, later drank herself to the point of mental incompetency and passed out drunk, smoking a cigarette in bed, and burned to death in a fire in her house years later. But during the time early on. Lost my sister and I to Child Protective Services. We went to different homes. But during that first year, we got reunited out of those homes and placed in the same home and raised together, which was just such a blessing. So that's really quick, but that was the beginning, and really why, probably the deepest reason why all this messaging is so important, because life is uncertain, it's unfair, and it's oftentimes unpleasant for everybody, not just me, and in different ways for everybody. That's true of all of us. And so, knowing that to be true, it's so important that we learn to cultivate, in my opinion, a gameness mindset. So life is hard. My beginning was hard, but I was reading some stats the other day, and I think it was like 1.2 million suicide attempts in America projected this year. There'll be probably 10 million adult arrests, 700,000 teenage arrests, over 600,000 marriages will end in divorce. 250,000 more kids will be dumped into the child welfare foster care system. And the number one killer again this year will be heart disease linked to inactivity and obesity. If you add that list up, it's a lot of pain. It's a lot of quitting. And then if you look at the collateral damage from all that quitting in other people's lives, it gets pretty magnificent. And probably for me, more importantly, is not only what if people could cultivate a mindset that could prevent some of those, but what if they had the mindset of gameness and they actually, because of that, lived their life to their fullest potential? They didn't just stave off tragedy, but they actually lived their life to their fullest potential. That is a game changer.
That's what you do. I've seen you do it. Somebody with your kind of background could legitimately be very wounded, and I'm sure you were, but somehow or other, you're not a callous person. You're one of the few therapists that is also a CEO. So, a lot of the therapists are kind of wounded, walking around healing themselves as they're healing their clients. But you didn't become callous, and you learned these lessons so that you could create a better life for yourself and for your own family when you got married, and then when your kids came along. So, do you have a couple of short pieces of advice for somebody who might be dealing with really stuff that happened in their background, but they don't want to be permanently wounded, or they don't want to turn callous or paranoid?
Yeah, I think sometimes I've worried that I do come across callous because I was a counselor for a number of years, and it was always heartbreaking to me because people would come to counseling and, they would want to talk about the pain they'd been through. They'd want to talk about their past, and they'd want to talk about their feelings. And it's not that I didn't care. I just knew that until they came to the point that they were willing to imagine their future and talk about what they would aspire to be and what they would aspire to do and have a purpose in their life. Kierkegaard tells us for life to be life must be understood backwards, but for it to be lived, it must be lived forward. And so, it is important to know your past, and it is important to understand your family of origin issues and to understand the things that we've been through. It's tremendously important. I always tell people the first part of this book, the first quadrant of this book, to upgrade your perspective. Really, what that's about is I kind of take for granted and imagine anybody who's reading that book has been through some disappointments in life, whether they've been tragic like mine have been, or different, but than mine, but still very disappointing. And they as adults, by the time we get to be an adult, none of us had anything to do with coming to Earth. I don't know of anybody yet that's ever decided they would come to Earth, right?
Wait,
So
did you choose this?
you haven't told me if you did.
Didn't we choose this?
So nobody had anything to do with getting here. Not only that, we didn't choose our zip code, our what womb we came out of, our neighborhood, our family. So if you think about from childhood up till adulthood, life is acting upon us. We're not the actors. We always want to think we are, but so life is acting upon all of us. And during that, you begin to shape a worldview. You begin to your self-esteem, your feelings about lots of things, your your value system. But if you think about it, all of that really is a reactionary formation and reacting to all the things happening to you. So what I challenge people to do when I would counsel them is say, look, now you're an adult. So now you get to decide going forward what you want your life to be like. So let's talk about what your goals are, what your purpose is. I always challenge people in 10 words or less to come up with a life purpose or a life mission. Mine is to advance the potential and purpose of others. So that's, the other reason I wrote the book. And so everything I do is connected to my life mission, to advance the potential and purpose of others. And so whether you're a CEO or whether you're a housewife, whatever you are, that you've heard it said, and I've heard it said, I can't remember who said it, but the most important person that you will ever lead, and the most important leadership you'll ever do is of yourself. And so that's what this book is about, is learning to lead you. And you'll never be a leader of others well, or a company well, until you've done that. And so it's the kind of harvesting what you have for me was, I came to the point in my life where I said, I'm either going to, because I was bitter, I was rebellious, I was angry, teenager, acting this out. I tried everything you could try to numb the pain, and I was a total heathen. And a miracle I'm not dead. And I had a real spiritual turnaround in my life after a couple of years out of high school, just really out of desperation, and started reading the Bible. And I found some direction and purpose for my life through that. And that's what turned me around. And I just had this epiphany that, I was either going to let what happened to me define me, or I was going to define what happened to me. And I decided, I was reading a lot of books about trying to figure out what my vocation might be, what my path in the future might be. And I kept reading things like, and after I got my life turned around, all I wanted to do was help kids that were going through what I'd gone through. I started volunteering at a shelter with at-risk kids and at-risk teenagers. And I read one day in this book that said, the best vocation is to find something that you would be doing if you didn't get paid for it, and find a way to get paid for it. And so I was volunteering at this place so much, I almost lost my standing in college, because I cared more about that than going to college. And I figured out that's what I cared about. And so I discovered I could get a job as a counselor doing that, and I can get paid to do it. And I thought I'd won the lottery. I came home and told my roommate, I said, you realize we can get paid to do what we're doing every day out there? And he was like, you're kidding. And so I truly thought I hit the lottery. So that's how my career started. But it really was, for me, a way to take the pain that I'd been through and harvest that into good. And so that's really how my career started. It's what I've spent my whole life doing. And it's evolving over time. I became fascinated with people's behavior. I kept getting asked to take on broader roles in my work, and got into leadership probably 25 years ago. Began to realize the possibilities of impacting in a macro way through people, through organizations, through systems and processes. And I got fascinated with all that, and, outcomes, and being data driven. And you're not on.
I mute myself, then I have the best thing. I said, speaking my language, results speak. Actually,
Yes.
that should be our next book. Let's collaborate on a book on results speak.
Good.
Because you're a very successful CEO. You run Eckert Connect, and you're impacting the lives of thousands of children, hundreds of thousands of families over your career. Can you just take a minute and talk about Eckert and your role there, and what you've done since going there? Because I remember you when you were located in California, running another important organization.
Yeah, the journey at Eckert's really been fun, and it's been a continuation of lots of lessons learned over the years in leadership. I didn't have a business degree. I'd never had a HR class or accounting class or finance class. Really, what drove me from day one was the first little campus of at-risk kids that I took over. A very challenging situation. They'd been through numerous leaders. I took the job because it paid more. We had 2 kids and another one on the way, and I needed to make more money. So it was pretty mercenary, really. My boss kept saying, you're a natural leader, you should do this. I was too scared to try it. And I really didn't have any choice. I tell a little bit about this in the book. And I took the job, and I come to find out he was right. And I did have natural leadership skills, but it was really my personal passion and strength of will that drove the changes on that campus. And I got a promotion after that. I kept getting asked to take on more. And eventually I had multiple campuses in multiple states. And I remember one night I came home and I was gone all the time. And we had these 3 little kids. And it was our anniversary. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I was unloading the last box. We just bought a house outside of Austin. And I got a call. The lid's blowing off of this residential program that we were running, one of the ones we were running. I had to leave again. And it was just one of those kind of crisis points in my life. I was like, I can't live like this. And I said, why can't I? I mean, when I run one campus, they're like a top. They're just running great. But now I've got several, and they're all just melting down. And I just, to make a long story short, in that experience, I realized I was a very personality-driven leader. It truly was the strength of my will and my personal knowledge, having started from the very entry-level position on that program, working all the way up to being the director of it. I knew everything about all of it. And I knew exactly what needed to be done on that campus in every place to make them run well. So I walked around the campus all the time and made sure all those things were getting done. Well, if you have 5 campuses or multiple states, you can't do that. And so it's a lot of what Collins wrote about in this book, Good to Great. You know, there's level 5 leadership is not level 4 leadership. Level 4 leadership is very personality driven. It's very the genius leader, if you will. And I hit this personal crisis, and I just sit down. And I thought, what is it that I do when I'm at that program every day to make it run so well, and how could I, make sure those things are happening in multiple sites? That was the beginning of what kind of developed into a management system that I call shared leadership model, shared decision-making model. And it's been really a big part of what we've done here at Eckerd to turn things around. When I came here 18 years ago, losing $3 million a year, we were serving about 9,500 kids. We're now serving probably over 30,000 a year in 22 states in the District of Columbia. And the way that happened, long story short, is when I came here, this Eckerd Connects was founded by Jack Eckerd, founder of Eckerd Drugs. Ironically, in Peter Drucker's book, there's a phrase where Peter says the highest purpose of any organization is to neutralize the impact of the mortality of any single man or woman on that enterprise, because any organization that can't perpetuate itself has failed. So I was right in the middle of embracing that situation here at Eckerd Connects, and I was reading Collins' book, Good to Great, and 2 of the leaders that he compared to each other was Kirk Walgren and Walgren Drugs and Jack Eckerd of Eckerd Drugs. And Eckerd was the genius leader. Walgren was the level 5 leader, always putting systems, processes, skillful people in roles that could do things beyond himself. He was always moving back, and Jack was always managing directly. He was indeed a genius leader, but he got involved in politics and other things, and then you can't be hands-on and be personality-driven leader. And so he ended up selling the drugstores off to CVS. Walgreens Drugs are still around, if you'll notice. So when I got here, Jack Eckerd had a stroke and passed in a few years before I came, but a lot of people didn't know about this nonprofit because this was really his baby, but he ran it just like he did the Eckerd drugstore business. So what we had when I went around and interviewed all the leaders, and I did a SWOT analysis. I had them all do their own SWOT analysis. I interviewed everybody in the building, and it was unanimous. They all recognized we needed to change, but everybody was scared to change, and they were all kind of waiting on the next genius idea to come out of Clearwater. And I said, well, Jack's not here anymore. And I said, so, we're going to have to find a way to harness the collective genius of everybody. And I said, there can't be one engine in Clearwater. There's got to be engines in every program. And so we began to operate that way. And so that would be another podcast for us. But our leadership model here and our decision-making model is all about being mission, vision, and values driven, and having ways to make decisions that are based on the use of data and outcomes. And we're very performance driven, and we make decisions collectively. And it's not a CEO and a CFO and a COO, a CEO in a smoke-filled room with some grand idea, and they go give everybody walking orders. Everybody has ownership, and if everybody doesn't buy in and everybody doesn't say yes, we don't move forward. And so, yeah, it's very powerful. but it keeps everybody engaged and aligned and happy. And so that's really what's happened here. We're we've been north of 350 million annual revenue, one of the largest nonprofits in America. We purposely pruned back to just over 200 billion. We returned a couple of large privatized child welfare contracts that we just didn't feel like were funded well enough to allow us to do high quality work. And so you've got to always make those hard decisions too. Sometimes your best growth and transformation isn't getting bigger. It's finding how do you get better and not compromise on your values. So it's
not enabling somebody to make the problem worse or in contradiction with what their stated mission and vision is. Well, David, you're so humble, yet what you've done and how you've grown that organization is phenomenal. As you know, very few organizations get to over $100 million a year. So you're in that very rarefied air, as you said, one of the largest nonprofits in the country. So resoluteness to a purpose, everything you've been talking about there is kind of validating that. You wanted to send a message to your kids, wisdom for their lives, wisdom born from your life experiences and how you didn't fall on your butt when you had setbacks. In fact, I think what you were telling me when you were thinking about names for the book, wasn't it you were thinking about maybe land on your feet, not on your butt, or what was it?
There was another word, but yes. Yeah. You were one of the ones who helped convince me that might reduce some of my audience. But it's the point was, I wanted to get people's attention but I think it ended up in a good place with what we got.
Now, how many years did you say that you've been at Eckerd so far now?
I'm in my 18th year.
18 years. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
If you asked me, I probably just said, I think it's been there 10 years or so. It's
gone so fast.
Right? Time flies. So you've always had that fighting spirit. And you talked in the book a little bit about get ready, trouble's coming. So I totally agree with what you said earlier about life is hard, right? If it was always fun, they wouldn't have called it life, right? So what does that mean? Get ready, trouble's coming. Without turning into a pessimist, talk about how you prepared for the stuff that hits the proverbial fan.
Yeah, I've learned that along the way, and it's every day, every person gets a knock on their door, and it's adversity, some level. Every day, you can either have a mindset of, well, I hope today goes okay, or you can say, today's probably not going to go okay. I'm going to have adversity. I'm going to have problems, and problems are going to knock on my door every day. But too often we act shocked. We're upset. Unexpected problems, challenges, adversity are going to come every day to our door. And there's three responses. And the get ready part is important, because that means, I'm not shocked when adversity comes. I expect it. And so having a mindset of being ready, the Navy SEALs have a mantra they say to each other when they get parachuted into a war-torn area that's in utter chaos. And they look at each other and say, remember, we are not here to survive this. We are here to take charge of this. And that's a mindset that's different than many people. The three responses that we're all going to have to problems and adversity are these. One, surrender. Two, I'm not going to surrender. I'm going to survive this. And I would label that resilience. And resilience is a popular word, and resilience is important. But you can have resilience and not have gameness. But if you have gameness, you're going to have resilience, because it's part of gameness. And what I mean by that is this. You can endure things and keep bouncing back and get tougher and more resilient, but not necessarily get better, wiser, more resourceful, and what I call bounce forward. And that's what gameness is. Gameness is taking charge of this and finding a way where when problems come, they not only don't have power over me, I find a way for them to create power in me. And that's just a huge, huge difference. And it's a mindset difference. And that's really what I decided in my life. I decided, I not only don't want to be a victim and survive. I hate the word, oh, he's a survivor. No, I'm more than a survivor. You know what I'm saying? I took what I went through and I found a way to harvest out of it ways to serve hundreds of thousands of people who are facing really tough adversity and find ways for them to triumph. So I took the bad thing that happened and I found a way. I love this. There's a verse in the Bible that says that God works all things together for good to those that love him and are committed to his purposes. I remind people that that verse doesn't say all things are good. It says that all things God is committed to working together for good and for those who are loving him and committed to his purposes. So, life's not always good, but how are you going to work them together for good? And so that's what that's about. And so I think that I have a little plaque that I keep. I've had for almost 40 years, and it says, "Only those who see the invisible will do the impossible." And so having resoluteness to a purpose is there's part of it in that never quit mindset. Never quit mindset means your circumstances aren't always going to be good, but it's upgrading your perspective means that you learn to see things better before you can see better things. That's having a never quit mindset is where you say, yeah, not everything in my life is great. Not everything in my life has been great. And I have problems. But what a never quit mindset means is I'm going to cultivate the ability to see things better before I can see better things. And so that ties to the next one, which is resoluteness to a purpose. And that is, having a vision means that you see something first that doesn't exist physically, but it does exist in your mind and you envision it. And everything that ever gets built at least twice. It's in somebody's mind before it actually gets materially built. And our lives are no different. And so you've got to ask yourself, what is your vision for your life? What's your vision for your business? And so having resoluteness to a purpose is important. It becomes your engine. It becomes your compass. And so that means seeing the invisible, right? So you can do the impossible. Because when it is invisible at that point, it does look impossible. So cultivating the ability to have a vision and truly have a vision, really truly see what that is you want to accomplish is important. And the next thing that's going to happen is adversity is going to knock on your door, right? And you're going to have to decide, is the problems knocking on my door going to have power over me? Or am I going to find a way to make the problems that I'm facing create power in me? Yes. And that's a mindset difference.
You mentioned the Navy SEALs. I read earlier this year, David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me. Did you read it?
Yeah.
Oh my God. It's amazing. So every time I think, oh, I can't do these extra reps or squats, I think of him and I think if he were standing near me, he'd say, "Wimp, get up, get over yourself," right?
Yeah, you probably saw I quote him a couple of times in my book, actually. Yeah. So one of his quotes that I love in a book is you're at risk of living a life so soft that you will never live your life to its fullest potential. And that's hard. That's a hard saying.
That to the extreme, right? Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
But he need to stop trying to prove stuff now.
Yeah. It's over the top, but the point is there's some truth there.
So there's another quote in here, and I love this one. And I think this is a great way for us to kind of wrap up. First of all, I want to let everybody know that if you'd like to buy a copy of the book or listen to it, you can listen to it on Audible. Gameness, Land on Your Feet, Not on Your Feelings by our guest, David Dennis. And you can also buy it or at gamenessleadership.com there. So one of the latter chapters of the book is making your dreams real. And there's your Vince Lombardi quote, "The difference between a successful person and others is not necessarily a lack of knowledge, but rather a lack of will." So how do people, especially let's just frame our answer in terms of business leaders, you're faced with all sorts of problems or maybe losses in your business. I certainly had to overcome losses in my business. In the early years, I learned a lot of very tough lessons, which made me a better leader because of having gone through them. But what would be your key bits of advice for CEOs and future CEOs about how they can make their dreams real?
Yeah, I have a little phrase that I say to my staff all the time. I say it to myself all the time, and it sounds very um, I don't know, not brilliant. But it's just the truth. Make a big deal out of little things, and you'll never have big things to deal with. And so I don't care what it is. Uh, Break it down into little things. Make a big deal out of every little thing, uh, and you won't have big things to deal with. Things are doable when you break them down, and so otherwise you can get overwhelmed, and it seems impossible, and it seems overwhelming. And so I just always practice that. And the other thing that I'm frequent saying is quality begets quantity. So I don't care what it is, if you do it well enough, you'll be given the opportunity, or you'll earn the opportunity to do more of it. So I've always been willing to outwork everybody I knew. There's no mystery to it. It's just hard work, and it's having the will required to act beyond your feelings. And when I start feeling overwhelmed, it makes me mad, and I just go do something. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, when things feel I'm in a tight place, or there's always something you can do. I don't care if it's to call and encourage one of your team members, one of your staff, whatever. And I take action. I don't get paralyzed by fear. And like you said in your lessons learned, I'm really big proponent on. I really feel like every adversity I've ever faced at work in my career, if I harvest it and get the good out of it that I can, and make sure that I walk away from that smarter, wiser, more resourceful. And in other words, I found a way for that problem to give me more power, and I got better because of it. That's energizing. And so there's nothing I can't lose. I mean, because I can win in every situation. I'm never going to quit. I'm never going to give up. And that's the way it is. And every job I've ever been given, your last interview that I saw you do, Patty Gooch, I think was her name.
Sandy Gooch. Sandy Gooch.
Sandy Gooch.
Yes.
I thought she probably had a better interview about my book Gameness than I'm giving you today, and just such a beautiful lesson on gameness, because here's a lady that, for her own health reasons, desperately needed a lot more available whole foods, nutritionally sound foods, not without toxic, ingredients and stuff, and organic foods. I mean, she was sick. And so she could have just said, woe is me, those foods aren't out there. They're just not available. Not only do I have this disease, which, like I said earlier, life's uncertain, unfair, and oftentimes unpleasant. She could have said, this is awful. I don't deserve this. And she could have just curled up in a fetal position and given up. But instead, she didn't just say, you know what, I'm going to find enough good food out there to survive. So she didn't surrender. That's the first response you can give to a problem. And she didn't say, I'm just going to survive. What did she do? She said, not only am I not going to surrender, and not only am I not just going to survive, I'm going to open up a chain of these health food stores across the country, and I'm going to help hundreds of thousands or millions of people learn the joy of eating whole foods and having a healthy life. And oh, by the way, and I'm going to grow a company and sell it for 60 million and become a philanthropist and bless other people with my resources and generosity. That is gameness. Okay. That's harvesting what you have. That's a never quit mindset. It's learning to see things better before there's better things. It's having resoluteness to a purpose. Her purpose was to be healthy and to share that message with other people, having a fighting spirit. She had all those problems. People tried to take her out as a business. She had to find a way to battle through all that. She did. And then she had to have the will required to act beyond her feelings. And man, what a story. I mean, she's walking, talking gameness.
Yes, she is, and you are. David, absolutely. The spirit of humility, kindness, resilience, and certainly empowerment, empowering others no matter where we go. Well, David, I feel like I could talk to you forever, but while we've been talking and while you were talking about Sandy Gooch, I thought of something and I think we ought to do it if you're not already doing it. Who is the first recipient of David Dennis's Gameness Award?
Wow. Okay.
I nominate Sandy Gooch.
I am with you. You know what? She is the epitome of what the message of this book is all about. I mean, I can't, and the more I thought about it, I just had to chuckle because you asked me to be on this interview with you, and frankly, I felt pretty unworthy. You have so many impressive business leaders that you coach, but you know, even that your whole business is coaching people. And why do people need coaches? Why do they need you?
All champions have coaches. All champions have coaches.
And you know what? They're up against it. Life is hard. They're challenged with obstacles. They're trying to find a way to what? Right? They're trying to find a way to harvest what they've got and make good out of the adversity and challenges that they're facing. You're helping them do that. And so but I thought of her story and I was listening to your interview and I was like, she is Gameness. It's perfect.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
that's another reason why you were a very obvious choice to interview for Visionary Voices. I'm so honored to have you as a friend and to watch your book in process while you were incubating it and then when you gave birth to it. And now as it becomes a very well-respected seller in business and religious circles. I mean, I just love it. I ended up buying last year, I bought like 20 copies from Christian
Thank
book
you.
clubs, I think, and I sent them out to clients and friends and such, and it was really great. But I will follow up with you regarding the Gameness Awards. I do think there's you know,
Yes.
and we can get sponsors, we could get a prize. So maybe the honoree gets to choose which children's welfare organization they'd like to see.
Wow.
You know, maybe it'll be the one in their neighborhood.
Yeah, I wouldn't care.
That'd be great. Wow.
Oh, it's plus I think it would cost people. Um, there's so many stories of gameness out there like hers. They're everywhere. They're powerful, but we need to promote more stories like that so people can begin to say, "Wow, what adversity or challenge do I have in my life that I could convert into something powerfully good? Not just try to survive it, certainly not surrender, but I'll close with this. There's a great, and I know you'll edit this, so I talked too much, I felt like today. So I in Genesis, and I know not all of your audience are people of faith or anything, so please be patient with me, those of you who are listening who may not be, but I don't think this is talked about enough. In Genesis, you know, if a person who believes in the creation story, you know, when God creates man and woman, he doesn't say, "Hey, I created this amazing universe. I created you too. I hope it all goes okay for you. I hope you enjoy it all. I hope it all works out." He didn't say that. Those are spectator, passive kind of comments to me. What he said is so powerful that we just don't talk about it enough. And he said, "Okay, and now what I want you to do is to go subdue all of the earth. And I want you to take dominion of every living thing." Those are like managerial, stewardship, even military terminologies. We aren't told to go, "Hope it all goes okay." If we got up and face every day, "Hope today goes okay." No. Today's going to go okay because I'm going to go okay. And he said, "Go take dominion. Go take charge of this. Let's see what you got. You know, go do something spectacular with this." And yes, it will not always go well. But just because life's uncertain, unfair, and oftentimes unpleasant doesn't mean you have to be.
Oh.
That's empowering to me. That's powerful to me. I love getting up every morning. I tell people all the time, I never feel like going to the gym. I always feel wonderful when I leave the gym. Endorphins aren't free, right? You got to pay for those suckers. And so I tell people that, you know, that's the beauty of this. It's powerful, you know, and so I love the idea of take dominion, of our life. And it it's things are going to be tough. And I can tell people all the time, so what?
Joy. I know our interviews come to an end, but there's one more bit of advice that I know that you are an expert on. So I want to just get a couple more pearls of wisdom from you just in the last minute.
Yeah.
You've been married for a long time. As far as I know, you have 4 sons, right? 4 boys?
4 boys and 1 girl.
Oh, 5 kids. Okay, so 5 kids. I've heard so much about the boys wrestling and everything. They're probably doctors and lawyers by now. So you got them through college. But it's very difficult, as you know, for CEOs, chairman of the board, company founders to stay married. Many entrepreneurs, many marriages in the US end in divorce. So you stayed married, you raised your children, but you said you also outworked everybody. So how did you balance family time, being active with your kids' activities, and maintaining that marriage? Obviously, it takes a good partner, but you have to choose that, right? So any tips and advice about how you did it or what you feel? Let's just say I'm a CEO and I came to you for counseling and I say I'm having challenges with my life, my marriage. Do you have any advice for me?
Yeah, this is going to sound very Pollyannish, but it's just the bedrock of my life, and that's my faith, then my family, then my work. So while I work very hard, the thing I work hardest at is my faith, my family, and my children. And I think that that's manifest in our children. That's the most important thing I've ever done in my life is love my wife and our kids and to love God. And so I don't do that perfectly. I don't do any of it perfectly. And but I have a never quit mindset. I have resoluteness to that purpose. I have a fighting spirit, and I have the will required to act beyond my feelings. And I understand the word, please forgive me. You know, because life is uncertain and unfair and unpleasant, part of that is me. We are fallen people living in a fallen world, and I'm part of it. So, we raised our kids every day before we went to bed at night. We had a family devotion time. We'd read something inspirational, sometimes from the Bible, sometimes from just a book or something. But we didn't just read something. We'd say a prayer together. We'd all take turns saying the prayer. But it was also our time to, if I had said something stupid to Becky or to one of them, or had failed to show up at something I was supposed to, I'd promised to and I didn't, or I'd reacted to them inappropriately, or whatever. I dropped the ball as a dad or a husband. I apologized in that meeting. And it was also a time where they did the same thing. And we also praised each other during that meeting. Little things like when they were little, I'm like, hey, you know what? I've been on you about making your bed. I walked by your room today. I noticed you made it. It's awesome. Whatever it is. But that daily time of meeting together, we never missed it. I don't remember ever missing it. Maybe we did a time or two, but I don't care how tired we were. We'd moan about it. We'd all like, I'm too tired. Like we'd pile up on the couch and we'd still do it. And our kids will say to this day that that's the most important thing we ever did. I always told our kids God doesn't have any grandkids. He only has kids. So he can't have a relationship with him through me. And so we really made it a point to make sure they understood how that happens. And I introduced them to the scriptures and shared it with them, didn't push it on them, but we certainly shared it with them and tried to live that out with them and those kind of things. But I told a guy I was counseling one time, very wealthy, successful businessman, early on into the cell phone towers business. And he had more money than he was ever going to spend, but he had a horrible marriage, horrible relationship with his gorgeous, beautiful 13-year-old daughter. Mom and daughter were coming to me for counseling. And I said, you know what? I said, nothing's ever going to change unless your dad, and I told her mom, unless your husband comes. And he's serious about this too, because it takes all of you. And he loved them, and he came to me, and I said, if he wants to come, tell him I want to see him by himself. So he called me, made an appointment. He came in, he sat down. He said, I don't understand it. He said, I run this company, I make all this money, and there's nothing I ever seek to accomplish in my life that I don't accomplish. And yet I've got a failed marriage and a failed relationship with my daughter. And I said to him, let me ask you this question. I said, you have a chair you sit in your living room or den, or a place where you like to sit and relax at night? And he said, oh yeah. He said, and beside that chair, I knew he was a big game hunter. He hunted all over the world, and a real sportsman. I said, I'm guessing you've got Field and Stream magazine over there, and I'm sure you've got Wall Street Journal, and I'm sure you've got, all the publications about, technology and radio towers and all. And I named off a few more things. And he said, oh yeah, I read all those. And I said, but I bet you don't have a book over there that says how to be the world's best dad, or how can I be the world's greatest husband? And I said, I bet you don't have a book over there about how to learn to love God. He said, he just got silent. And I said, you're an expert on all those things because it's what you've been committed to. And you've been diligent about those things. You become an expert on those things. It's what you spend your time on. But I said, can you imagine if your wife or your daughter looked over there beside your chair and saw one of those other books? And I said, can you imagine how your life would change if you said, you know what? I'm going to become an expert. I'm going to become the world's greatest husband. I'm going to become the world's greatest dad. And he said, you don't need to tell me, you don't need to say anything else to me. He said, I'll call you back in 6 months. And completely changed his life. He got focused on, he said, I'm embarrassed. And he made that his priority. And so long answer to your question, but it's real important to me. And you can have both. And frankly, I think the reason people work for me so long and stay with me so long is not because I'm perfect or, I'm the brightest guy, but they know I really care about them. And I think that their wives and husbands like the fact that family's first. From the day I got here till now, I don't care what's going on with our staff. I don't care what's going on at work. I always ask them, I know what's going on with their families. I know what's going on with their marriages. And I always ask, did you go to that ball game? Did you go to that play? Did you get your vacation in? Have you had your date with your wife? That kind of stuff. It's always family first, period. And you know what? Doing good is good business. I tell people that all the time. It sounds silly, but doing good is good business. Do good at home. You're never going to be perfect. I'm not saying be perfect at home.
But you are living proof. You are living proof that you can build an organization, you can scale it, you can still be married, and it can do good work. And when time comes to make the tough decisions, you can walk away from contracts which you can't win on, or where you feel that that's just not, you're not the right person for that circumstance, right? And so you can right size as well. Well, David Dennis, thank you so much. You are going to hear more from me regarding the Gameness Awards. I think it's one of my best ideas.
I absolutely. Well, you know what? That's your biggest gift that you have. You have many, but that's your biggest one, in my opinion. It's amazing. So great being with you, and I'll always appreciate the advice you gave me 18 years ago on my way from California when I was leaving there to my next assignment. I was struggling about what I was going to do, and you said, "Well, you got to stop mugwumping." And I said, what is that? And you said, well, you got your mug on one side of the face and your wump on the other. And that's a big part of what Gameness is. You got to make a decision. You got to take action. And I never forgot that. And it's been a part of my repertoire. So thank you for that.
All right. Thank you, David. Take care.
Yep. See ya.
All right. Bye now.